I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who could destroy everything someone loved and walk away smiling. But then again, I never thought my own family would treat me like garbage while I paid their bills and raised my son alone under their roof. The designer handbag hit the kitchen table with a thud that made my heart sink. I knew what was coming. Ashley had gone shopping again, another luxury purchase on credit that she'd somehow justify as essential. My 7-year-old son Leo was passing through the kitchen, his small hands clutching the glass of water I'd just given him, when it happened. One stumble, one splash, and the water cascaded across that overpriced leather like a miniature tsunami. Time seemed to freeze. I watched the water soak into the material, watched Ashley's face contort from shock into pure rage, and I knew this moment would change everything. I just didn't know how much yet. Ashley's scream could have shattered windows. "Do you see this? This useless brat just ruined everything I have. You and him are nothing but leeches sucking this family dry." She snatched the bag off the table, droplets flying everywhere, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the wet leather. I rushed over, my hands already reaching for a dish towel. "It was just an accident, Ashley. Please, I'll clean it up." My voice came out smaller than I wanted, that familiar pleading tone I'd developed over the years living in my father Frank's house. Ashley jerked the bag away from my reach, her eyes wild. "An accident? Mom was right. You had that kid just to drag this entire family down into the mud with you." The venom in her voice made Leo flinch against my leg. My son looked up at me with those wide, terrified eyes, then turned to face his aunt. Despite the fear making his small frame tremble, he straightened his shoulders. "I didn't mean to. Please don't yell at my mom." The sound of heavy footsteps thundered from the living room. My father Frank burst into the kitchen, his weathered hands gripping that old wrench he always carried around like some kind of trophy from his working days. His face was red, the veins in his neck bulging the way they always did before things got ugly. "You dare talk back to an adult, you little punk?" Frank's voice boomed through the kitchen. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion and lightning speed all at once. Frank's rough hand connected with Leo's cheek with a crack that echoed in my ears. My baby stumbled backward, his small body crumpling to the floor. The glass he'd been holding shattered against the tile, adding its own violence to the moment. I lunged forward, putting myself between Frank and Leo, but he shoved me aside like I weighed nothing. "You stay out of this. It's your weakness that made him this pathetic in the first place." His breath reeked of the cheap beer he'd been nursing in front of the television. Before I could react, Frank grabbed Leo by his shirt collar, the fabric twisting in his gnarled fists. He dragged my son across the kitchen floor, Leo's shoes squeaking against the tiles as he tried to find his footing. He needs to learn a lesson about how harsh life really is. My mother Eleanor appeared in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room, her arms crossed over her chest. She watched her husband drag her grandson across the floor with the same expression she might use while observing someone taking out the trash. No horror, no protest, just cold observation. Frank yanked open the back door. Rain hammered against the metal awning outside, and through the doorway, I could see ice pellets mixed with the downpour. The concrete patio glistened with a dangerous sheen of water and half-melted hail. "Dad, no!" I screamed, finally finding my voice. "It's freezing out there." He ignored me completely. With a grunt of effort, Frank hurled Leo through the doorway. My son's small body sailed through the air before crashing against the metal railing of the back porch. The impact drove the air from Leo's lungs in a sharp cry of pain that cut through the sound of the storm. I tried to rush past Frank, but he blocked the doorway with his bulk. Through the gap between his arm and the doorframe, I could see Leo struggling to his feet on the slick metal grating, already soaked through, his thin t-shirt plastered to his shaking frame. "Let me get him!" I clawed at Frank's arm, but he didn't even seem to feel it. From behind me, Eleanor's voice cut through the chaos with disturbing calm. "At least the rain will wash away his stupidity." She'd moved to the sink, looking out the window at her grandson with the same detached interest she might show a stray cat. Ashley had her phone out, of course. Through my tears, I could see her tilting it to get the perfect angle of Leo huddled against the railing, his arms wrapped around himself as hail bounced off his shoulders. Her thumbs flew across the screen, and I knew she was posting it somewhere, sharing my son's humiliation with whoever would watch. The notification sound from her phone made me want to vomit. She was adding a caption, probably something cruel and clever that would get her likes from her equally vapid friends. Frank slammed the door shut with enough force to rattle the frame. The deadbolt clicked into place with a finality that felt like a gunshot. He turned to face me, his finger jabbing toward my chest. "He stays out there until he learns what respect means. And if you open that door, you're going out there with him. Understand?" I understood perfectly. I understood that I'd let things get to this point. I understood that every time I'd made excuses, every time I'd told myself it would get better, every time I'd prioritized keeping the peace over protecting my son, I'd been building toward this moment. Through the window over the sink, I could see Leo pressed against the glass of the back door, his small hands flat against the pane, his face a mask of cold and confusion. His lips were already taking on a bluish tint. That night, something inside me died. As I stood in that kitchen, watching my father settle back into his recliner, watching my mother return to her crossword puzzle, watching my sister scroll through the comments on her cruel post, I felt the fear that had kept me compliant for so long simply evaporate. In its place grew something cold and sharp and utterly focused. Frank finally let Leo back inside after 30 minutes, that felt like 30 years. I wrapped my shivering son in every blanket I could find, held him in the bathroom with the space heater running, and whispered promises into his wet hair. But I wasn't making the promises he thought I was making. I wasn't promising that everything would be okay, that we'd get through this together by being strong and patient. I was promising revenge. Over the next week, I stopped crying. I stopped pleading. I stopped trying to make myself smaller to fit into the spaces they allowed me. Instead, I watched. I observed. I learned. Frank's obsession with his Ford F-150 went beyond normal pride of ownership. That truck was his identity, his masculinity made metal. He spent hours in the garage, tinkering with it, talking about its immortal engine to anyone who'd listen. I started paying attention to his maintenance schedule, to where he kept his tools, to which parts he considered most precious. Every Sunday morning, Eleanor performed her ritual with the china cabinet. The Limoges porcelain inside had supposedly been in her family for generations, though I'd never heard her mention any family before Frank. She'd unlock the glass case with a small key she kept hidden in an old tea tin on top of the refrigerator, remove each piece carefully, dust it with a special cloth, and replace it with the reverence someone might show religious relics. I watched her routine from the corner of my eye while making breakfast, memorizing every movement, every sigh of satisfaction as she handled those precious plates and teacups. Ashley's obsession was more modern but no less consuming. Her entire existence revolved around her social media presence, the carefully curated image of a successful, fashionable young woman living her best life. What her followers didn't know was that every designer item she flaunted was bought on credit, that her bank account was perpetually overdrawn, that she was drowning in debt while pretending to swim in luxury. I created a fake profile, a generic woman's account with a stock photo and enough followers to look legitimate. I started following Ashley's followers, especially the ones who seemed catty or competitive. I tracked her Poshmark and eBay accounts where she sold last season's purchases to make room for new ones. I documented everything. During those long evenings after Leo was asleep, I'd sit in my small room with my laptop, building my case, gathering my ammunition. I wasn't just planning to hurt them. I was planning to destroy what they loved most, the way they'd destroyed my son's sense of safety. Leo noticed the change in me. He was perceptive that way, probably from having to read the room constantly to avoid setting off another explosion. One night, as I tucked him into bed, he looked up at me with those serious eyes. "Mom, are we going to leave?" I smoothed his hair back from his forehead, where a fading bruise still shadowed his temple. "Yes, baby, but first, I need to make sure they understand what they've done. They took our warmth, our safety, our peace. I'm going to take something from them too." He nodded slowly, and I saw something in his expression that broke my heart and steeled my resolve simultaneously. Understanding. My 7-year-old son understood the concept of payback because he'd learned it from the people who should have been teaching him about love. The weather forecast became my ally. Another major storm system was rolling in, predicted to hit on Friday night. The irony was almost too perfect. They'd thrown Leo out into a storm, so a storm would cover my tracks as I dismantled their world. Friday arrived with building clouds and dropping temperatures. The local news was already warning people to stay inside, to prepare for severe weather. Perfect. Dinner was a tense affair, as it always was. Frank complained about the pot roast I'd made, even though he ate 3 servings. Eleanor critiqued everything from the way I'd set the table to how I'd folded the napkins. Ashley barely looked up from her phone, probably planning her next shopping spree or filtering another selfie to oblivion. Around 8 o'clock, the first raindrops began pattering against the windows. By 9, the wind was howling, and everyone had settled into their usual evening routines. Frank in his recliner, watching some reality show about people fixing up old cars. Eleanor in the dining room with her magazines. Ashley in her bedroom, no doubt live streaming or posting stories. Leo and I were supposedly in my room, getting ready for bed. Instead, I had him fully dressed, our bags packed and hidden under my bed. "Remember what I told you?" I whispered. "Stay here, stay quiet. When I come back, we leave immediately. Don't ask questions, just move." He nodded solemnly, and I kissed his forehead before slipping out into the hallway. Ashley's room was first. My heart pounded as I eased her door open, but she had her headphones on, completely absorbed in recording some video for her followers. She sat with her back to the door, surrounded by the spoils of her shopping addiction. I didn't touch the bags. I didn't rip the clothes or scratch the leather. That would have been too obvious, too quickly discovered. Instead, I pulled out my phone and began systematically photographing every item, making note of brands, conditions, prices when I could see tags. Ashley had left her laptop open on her bed, still logged into everything. The girl had never heard of password protection, too confident that no one would dare invade her space. I took photos of her email, her banking app showing a negative balance, her credit card statements with their terrifying totals. Then I accessed her Poshmark account and created new listings for everything in her room. Designer bags, shoes, dresses, all priced at 30 to 40% below market value for quick sales. I scheduled them to go live at midnight. The money would go into her account, but not for long. Years ago, when Ashley had briefly tried to be nice to me, back when she thought I might be useful, she'd asked me to help her set up a PayPal account. I still remembered the password because she'd used the same one she used for everything, our childhood street address. I logged into her PayPal, linked it to a new anonymous cryptocurrency wallet I'd created, and set up an automatic transfer for any incoming funds. The final touch was the email. I'd been composing it in my head for days. To Ashley's most competitive followers, the ones who were always trying to outdo her, the ones who smiled sweetly while throwing shade in the comments, I sent a carefully worded message from a burner email account. The subject line read, "Thought you'd want to know about Ashley Thompson." The body of the email was brief and devastating. "Since you follow Ashley, I thought you might be interested to know she's having some financial troubles. She's been hiding massive credit card debt and is now having a fire sale of all her designer items. Probably should have been more honest about that influencer lifestyle, huh? See attachments for proof." I attached screenshots of her debt, her desperate sales, everything that would shatter the illusion she'd built. Then I hit send and logged out of everything, wiping my digital fingerprints as I went. Ashley continued recording her video, completely oblivious to the destruction of her carefully constructed image that would unfold over the next few hours. The hallway was quiet as I moved toward the dining room. Eleanor had moved to the living room, sitting in her chair by the window, reading by lamplight. The rain created patterns on the glass that she seemed to be watching between paragraphs. Frank had dozed off in his recliner, snoring softly. The TV flickered with images of people arguing about carburetors. I moved like a ghost to the kitchen. The tea tin on top of the refrigerator was exactly where it always was. I climbed onto a chair, retrieved it, and there it was, the small brass key that protected Eleanor's most prized possessions. The china cabinet was in the formal living room, a space we rarely used. The lock turned smoothly, and the glass door swung open with barely a whisper. I'd brought a small hammer from Frank's toolbox, wrapped in a towel to muffle any sound. The first plate I removed was cool and smooth in my hands, painted with delicate flowers that probably meant something to someone once. I laid it on the thick towel I'd spread on the floor and brought the hammer down with controlled force. Not enough to shatter it into dust, but enough to crack it into large, jagged pieces. One by one, I went through the collection. Plates, teacups, saucers, serving dishes, each one received the same treatment. Methodical destruction that left recognizable fragments, like a museum of broken dreams. When I was finished, I carefully arranged the pieces back in the cabinet. I created a tableau of destruction, each broken item positioned to be clearly visible through the glass. The fracture lines caught the light from the hallway, creating a spiderweb effect across the entire display. I locked the cabinet again, replaced the key, and stood back to admire my work. Tomorrow morning, when Eleanor went to perform her Sunday ritual, she'd find her precious past shattered but perfectly preserved in its brokenness. She wouldn't be able to look away from it, and she wouldn't be able to fix it. The storm was reaching its peak as I slipped out the back door into the garage. Rain drummed on the metal roof like applause. Frank's F-150 sat in the center of the space, chrome gleaming even in the dim light from the single bulb overhead. I'd watched Frank work on this truck dozens of times, always from a distance, always pretending I wasn't interested. But I'd been absorbing everything, learning the language of engines and parts, understanding what made this machine his pride and joy. The hood opened smoothly. I'd oiled the hinges that afternoon while everyone was out, knowing I'd need silence tonight. The engine sat before me like a sleeping beast, and I was about to perform surgery. Using Frank's own tools, the expensive ones he kept locked in his special box, I began disassembling the heart of his truck. The serpentine belt came off first, slithering out like a dead snake. The spark plugs followed, one by one. The oil filter, the air filter. I worked with practiced efficiency, laying each part carefully on a clean tarp I'd spread beside the truck. The final act required the most audacity. I had a 5-pound bag of sugar I'd bought with grocery money, hidden in my coat pocket. The gas tank cap unscrewed easily. The sugar poured in with a soft whisper, granules dissolving into the gasoline, beginning their slow, devastating work. This wouldn't destroy the engine immediately. Frank would probably be able to start it once, maybe twice. But then, as the sugar worked its way through the fuel system, the engine would begin to choke and sputter. It would die slowly, painfully, the way Leo had slowly learned to fear his own home. I closed the hood, arranged the parts in a neat row beside the truck like an accusation, and cleaned Frank's tools before replacing them. He'd know what I'd done. He'd see his precious tools laid out, clean and organized, next to the dissected pieces of his most prized possession. The house was silent when I returned inside. I was soaked from the rain, but I didn't care. I went to my room, where Leo was sitting on the bed, still dressed, eyes wide. "Is it time?" he whispered. "Almost. We have to wait for them to find everything. I want to see their faces." We didn't have to wait long. Around 11, I heard Ashley's first scream. It started as confusion, then escalated to pure panic as she realized what was happening. Her phone must have started pinging with notifications, messages from people who'd received my email, comments on her suddenly desperate sales listings. "What the hell? What the actual hell?" Her voice carried through the house. "Someone hacked my account. Someone is selling all my stuff." I heard footsteps running, probably Eleanor going to see what the commotion was about. More voices, Frank waking up, grumbling about the noise. Then Eleanor's voice, sharp and shocked. "My china, my china." I took Leo's hand and walked out of my room. Our bags were on my shoulders. We moved down the hallway toward the sound of chaos erupting in the living room. Eleanor stood in front of the china cabinet, her hand pressed to the glass as if she could somehow hold the pieces together through sheer will. Her face had gone pale, her mouth working soundlessly. Ashley was in the foyer, her phone clutched in both hands, scrolling frantically through notifications. Her perfectly made-up face was streaked with tears. "My accounts are empty. Everything's gone. People are messaging me. They're laughing at me." Frank stormed in from the garage, water dripping from his clothes. He must have gone to check on something, maybe heard an unusual sound. His face was purple with rage. "My truck! Someone took apart my truck. My tools. Everything." They all turned to look at me simultaneously, standing there calm and dry in the center of their storm. "You!" Frank snarled. "What did you do?" I looked at each of them in turn, meeting their eyes with a steadiness I'd never felt before. Leo's hand squeezed mine, and I squeezed back. "Ashley," I said, my voice level and cold. "You wanted a glamorous life? Now you can start from zero. Literally. Every designer item in your room is being sold as we speak, and the money is somewhere you'll never find it. And those emails about your debt? I sent those to everyone who matters in your little social circle. Your fake life is over." Ashley's face crumpled. She sank to her knees, still gripping her phone like it might somehow save her. I turned to Eleanor. "Mom, you've always lived in the past, clinging to these symbols of a perfect history that never existed. I helped you display that past more accurately, broken and empty. Every piece of your precious china is destroyed, and you did that the day you stood by and let your husband throw your grandson into a storm." Eleanor made a sound like a wounded animal, turning back to the cabinet, her fingers tracing the glass over the shattered remains. Finally, I looked at Frank. He'd started to move toward me, his fists clenched, but something in my expression stopped him. "Dad, you always talked about building things with your own hands, about teaching hard lessons. I used your own legacy to show you what it feels like to have everything dismantled. You taught me about harshness. Consider this my final lesson to you. Your truck's engine is full of sugar. It'll run once, maybe twice, and then it'll die from the inside out, just like you tried to do to my son." Frank lunged forward, but his foot caught on the edge of the rug. He stumbled, falling hard onto his knees. For the first time in my life, I saw him look weak, old, defeated. Eleanor was crying, her shoulders shaking as she pressed herself against the china cabinet. Ashley was curled on the floor, scrolling through message after message of mockery and schadenfreude from people she'd thought were friends. I stepped around Frank's crumpled form, Leo walking beside me, matching my pace. We moved toward the front door. I'd called for a taxi earlier, using some of the money from Ashley's automatic transfers. It was waiting at the curb, windshield wipers beating against the rain. "Where will you go?" Eleanor's voice was small, broken. "You have nothing. You are nothing." I paused at the door, looking back at them one last time. "I have everything that matters. I have my son, I have my self-respect, and I have my freedom. You have a broken cabinet, a broken image, and a broken truck. Seems fair to me." Frank struggled to his feet, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You'll be back. You'll come crawling back, and when you do, that door will be locked." I actually laughed. The sound felt strange coming from my throat, like I was remembering how after years of forgetting. "Dad, I'd rather sleep on the street than spend another night under this roof. You've given me nothing but pain. I'm leaving you with the same." The rain had started to let up as we walked to the taxi. Leo climbed in first, and I followed, pulling the door shut on that house, that life, that version of myself who'd tolerated the intolerable. As the taxi pulled away, I looked back once. Through the lit windows, I could see their silhouettes. 3 people frozen in their own private disasters, unable to help each other because they'd never learned how to help anyone. The first light of dawn was breaking through the clouds as we drove. The storm had passed, leaving everything washed clean and new. I didn't know where we were going, not exactly. I had enough money for a motel for a few weeks, enough time to figure out our next steps. I had my health, my skills, my determination. More importantly, I had Leo. And for the first time in years, when I looked at my son in the rearview mirror, I saw him smile. Really smile, with his whole face, without that shadow of fear that had become so familiar. "Mom?" he said softly. "Are we really free?" I reached back and took his hand. "Yeah, baby, we're really free. They're stuck in the ashes of their own cruelty, but we're moving forward. We're going to build something better, something they can't touch." The taxi driver, an older woman with kind eyes, met my gaze in the mirror. "Sounds like you had quite a night." "You could say that," I replied. I finally stopped being a victim and became something better. "What's that?" she asked. I looked out the window at the sunrise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. A survivor, a mother, a woman who knows her worth. We drove on, leaving behind the house where I'd been small and scared, heading toward a future I'd build with my own hands. Behind us, Frank would discover his truck wouldn't start, that his tools had been used against him. Eleanor would spend days staring at the ruins of her porcelain shrine. Ashley would face the collapse of her carefully constructed lies. But I wouldn't be there to see it. I wouldn't be there to be blamed or to be their target. I'd done what I needed to do, taken back some measure of power, and now I was choosing something they never could: to walk away and build a life based on love instead of control. The motel we pulled up to wasn't fancy, but it was clean and it was ours. As I paid the taxi driver and helped Leo with our bags, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of their expectations, their cruelty, their constant diminishment had lifted. We checked into room 247, and I locked the door behind us, that simple click of the deadbolt sounding like freedom. Leo jumped onto one of the beds, bouncing slightly, then looked at me with wonder. "We can really stay here? Just us?" "Just us, baby. For as long as we need." That night, for the first time in months, Leo slept through without nightmares. I sat by the window, watching the parking lot, thinking about the future. I'd need to find a job, find an apartment eventually, find a way to give Leo the stable, loving home he deserved. But I'd also given him something equally important: proof that standing up to bullies, even when they're family, is possible. That no one has the right to diminish you, no matter how much they claim to love you. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. I thought about the wreckage I'd left behind, and I felt no guilt. They'd spent years breaking me down piece by piece, watching me suffer, using my love and my fear to keep me trapped. They'd hurt my child, the one pure and innocent thing in that toxic house. My revenge hadn't been about cruelty for cruelty's sake. It had been about justice, about making them feel a fraction of the loss they'd inflicted on us. They'd taken our safety, our peace, our dignity. I'd taken their toys, their symbols, their precious possessions. It seemed more than fair. As dawn broke on our first morning of freedom, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Single motherhood, starting over with almost nothing, rebuilding from the ground up. But we'd faced harder things. We'd survived a family that was supposed to love us but only knew how to hurt. Whatever came next, we'd face it together, free from the weight of their cruelty, free to become whoever we wanted to be. They were welcome to their broken things, their shattered pride, their ruined possessions. I had something infinitely more valuable: hope, love, and the strength to use them. The storm had set us free, and we were never going back.